My name is Zariah West. I'm 42 years old. I served 20 years in the United States Air Force. These days, I walk with a slight limp and a quiet mind. I don't speak much about my deployments or the chopper crash outside Kandahar. And I definitely don't talk about the Silver Star I was awarded afterward. But that day, on that flight, I didn't need to say a word. It started like any other boarding. I'd flown from San Antonio, heading to Florida for a family reunion. Not mine, my ex-husband's. We divorced years ago, but his grandfather had asked to see me. And when a man who once called you his favorite granddaughter-in-law is dying, you don't ignore that. I'd bought myself a first-class ticket. Not because I wanted to be pampered, but because my back, after 3 surgeries, couldn't handle the tight rows of economy. My VA doctor had warned me last year. No more long flights in coach, not unless I wanted to spend a month recovering, so I boarded early, quietly. I placed my small carry-on above seat 2A. The seat I paid for, that's when she appeared. Amelia, my ex's sister-in-law. The kind of woman who always wore lip gloss, even at funerals. The kind of woman who smiled at you while twisting the knife. She was the lead flight attendant. I hadn't known that before I boarded. Zariah, she said, her voice like warm syrup. Hey, can I talk to you for a second? I turned. She was already holding a clipboard, already playing the part. There's been a change, she continued. Operational adjustment. We've got a diamond tier passenger on standby. Corporate says they get priority. I blinked. She gestured casually, almost apologetic. We'll need to move you to 31B, still aisle, but back of the cabin. I glanced at my ticket. Still said 2A. I looked back at her. She didn't break eye contact. You're not on the loyalty tier, she added gently. And well, I guess a soldier should be fine with a middle row seat, right? She smiled, like it was a joke. A soldier's place. There it was. A sentence soaked in sugar and venom. I could have argued. I could have asked for a supervisor. But instead, I just looked at her and said, understood. She tilted her head, surprised I hadn't made a scene. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I took my bag and walked the length of that plane in silence. Past people in suits. Past stares that flicked over me without sticking. 31B was tight. Wedged between a teenager with blaring headphones and a man with elbows like crowbars, I sat carefully. My spine screamed in protest. I adjusted, breathed, swallowed the pain. That's when I felt it, the small metal box in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out, not to show, not to prove anything, just to hold. Inside was my Silver Star, still clean, still heavy, still mine. I didn't wear it. I never had. But I kept it close, a reminder of who I was, even when people forgot. A young man across the aisle had noticed. I saw his eyes drop to the box, then to my hands. He didn't say anything, but he raised his phone, quietly, started recording. Not because I was a spectacle, because something about the moment didn't feel right. I sat there staring at the seat I'd paid for, 10 rows ahead. I didn't know that 2 minutes later, the entire plane would stop moving. I didn't know the cockpit door would swing open. And I didn't know that everything Amelia had built on that fake smile was about to come crashing down. The intercom clicked, but it wasn't the usual engine check or pre-flight protocol. The captain's voice was calm, too calm. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have a priority boarding adjustment. I turned my head just slightly. From where I sat, I couldn't see much past the galley curtain, but I could hear it. The shift in the air, the footsteps, not rushed, not apologetic. Authoritative, boots, not dress shoes, clicked down the aisle, one, then another. They didn't stop at the first-class cabin. They kept walking. Then the curtain parted. A man stepped through. Not a man. A figure. He wore full-service dress, deep blue, sharp as a blade, chest adorned, gloves in hand, silver eagle pins on his shoulders, and on his epaulets, 4 stars. The entire cabin went dead silent. He didn't smile. He didn't glance left or right. He walked with purpose, stopping directly in front of row 31. "Ma'am," he said. I blinked, slowly. "I'm General Darrell Flynn," he added, lowering his voice just enough for me to hear without a scene. "I saw the footage. I recognized your name." I nodded, stunned. My voice wasn't ready to work yet. He continued. I believe you served under Lieutenant Colonel Hayes in Kandahar? Yes, sir. I reviewed your commendation. You pulled 2 men from a burning aircraft and recovered encrypted systems while injured. I didn't speak. He straightened. Then, to the entire plane, he said, "This woman was awarded the Silver Star. That honor is not decorative. It means she risked her life for this country. And while she may never ask for recognition, she deserves basic respect." He turned to the cockpit. "Captain," he called out. The captain stepped out, surprised, pale. "Yes, sir. Vacate seat 1C. I'll take hers." The captain looked between us, swallowed hard, and nodded. General Flynn turned back to me. "Ma'am," he said, "please follow me." A murmur spread through the cabin like ripples across still water. I stood, not proud, not angry, just whole. I picked up my small bag, walked past the same faces that had ignored me 10 minutes earlier. When I passed Amelia, she stood frozen near the beverage cart. Her eyes were wide. Her cheeks had lost color. I didn't look at her long. I didn't need to. The general led me to 1C, stepped aside, and waited for me to sit. I did. He nodded once, turned on his heel, and walked back toward the rear, toward 31B. As he passed Amelia, he said quietly, barely a breath, "We don't let heroes fly in the back." He didn't look at her again, but I did. Her face collapsed, and for the first time since boarding that plane, I felt no pain in my back, only stillness and justice. They say money can't buy dignity. Maybe that's true, but sometimes it buys space to breathe. I didn't book that first-class seat because I needed champagne or a warm towel. I booked it because I've had 3 surgeries on my lower spine, and coach seats feel like coffins. 2 years ago, my VA doctor leaned back in his chair after reviewing the scans. His face didn't move much, but I caught it, the twitch of concern he tried to hide. "Zariah," he said, "you need to stop flying in the back. Your L3 and L4 are barely holding. Compression that tight for more than 2 hours, you'll be flat on your back for a week." I nodded. I didn't argue. I never do with doctors who don't sugarcoat. So when the email came about the family gathering, I knew what I had to do. Florida, 4-hour flight. Non-stop. I didn't plan to go at first. I hadn't seen that side of the family in years. My ex-husband and I had split quietly, years ago, after the long distance and the silence between deployments became too wide to fix. We didn't fight, we just disappeared from each other. Still, his grandfather had always been kind to me. He used to call me his soldier girl. He once told me during a Thanksgiving dinner while carving a dry turkey, "You've done more for this country than half the suits in this room. Never forget that, Zariah." And now he was dying, bedridden, fading. He'd asked through a nurse if I'd be there. Not come visit, not say goodbye, just, "Will she be there?" So I said yes. I opened my laptop, searched the flights, filtered for non-stop. Prices weren't kind that week. Everything had surged. I hovered over the economy fare. My finger shook slightly from the nerve damage, but I knew better. I clicked the seat map, selected 2A, first class, window, paid with my card, half of it covered by the last installment of my disability stipend. The rest, from savings. No upgrades, no freebies. I paid for it. That seat wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity with a price tag. And no one knew. I didn't call ahead, didn't tell the family I was coming, didn't post on Facebook, didn't ask for a ride from the airport. I wasn't returning as part of the family. I was showing up as a shadow, as a guest from another chapter they had closed. And maybe part of me preferred it that way. I'd never said anything when Amelia made comments at dinners. I never reacted when she once joked about my medals, saying, "We get it, Zariah. You're a war hero, but maybe try being a wife sometime." She said it with wine in her hand and laughter in her eyes. And I just smiled and cleared the plates. Because that's what I do. I keep the peace until the peace keeps me. But deep down, I think I knew Amelia didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a reminder of something she couldn't become. Respected, proven, heard. So no, I didn't expect a warm welcome. I didn't expect a banner at the airport. But I also didn't expect her to be the one holding the clipboard on that flight. When I saw her at the plane door, lipstick flawless, posture crisp, I knew something would go wrong. I just didn't know what. Still, I hoped, foolishly, that maybe she'd smile and say hello, that maybe the years had softened her. But no. The moment she saw my seat number, something flickered in her expression, not anger, satisfaction. Like she'd been handed an opportunity that she didn't have to ask for. I know what she saw. A woman flying alone, no husband, no rank on her shoulders, plain jacket, no makeup. Just another middle-aged veteran with stiff joints and good posture. Not someone important. Not someone who mattered. Not someone who needed that seat. But I did. Not because of ego, because of medical necessity, because of pain, and even more than that, because I had paid for it. I earned every dollar. I sacrificed for every privilege I now allowed myself. And I never once asked for pity. But that day, sitting between a teenager chewing gum and a businessman who kept elbowing the armrest, I understood something. People don't need to slap you to make you feel small. Sometimes they just move you, physically, socially, quietly. They move you from the place you paid for to the place they think you belong, and they smile while doing it. I remember the last time Amelia spoke my name with that same twisted smile. It was 5 years ago, Thanksgiving dinner at my in-laws' house. Long table, china dishes that hadn't been used since Reagan was in office, people passing mashed potatoes with fake politeness, crystal glasses clinking just a little too loud. I had just come home from my 3rd deployment, still adjusting to civilian air. I'd barely unpacked my duffel when I was invited, summoned for dinner. "You're part of the family," they said. At that point, my marriage was already on life support. My husband was there but silent, chewing turkey like it had wronged him. We hadn't looked each other in the eye for months. I sat at the far end of the table, not out of shame, out of instinct. It's where I always ended up. Watching, listening, breathing slower than everyone else. And that's when it happened. Amelia was sitting across from me, wearing a dress just tight enough to look effortless. She never ate the food, just moved it around like strategy. The topic of service came up. Someone asked about my last deployment. I gave the basics: logistics, coordination, non-combat role. I left out the ambush, the fire, the extraction. The way I dragged a corporal 60 feet with half a shoulder, I always leave those parts out. But my ex-mother-in-law, bless her nerves, decided to chime in. "You know, Zariah just got her 3rd commendation. That Silver Star came in last month. We're very proud." The room went quiet for a second. Forks hovered. Then Amelia laughed. Soft, rehearsed. "Yeah," she said. "Zariah has medals, but she couldn't keep a husband." No one responded. Not out loud. But I watched the way my ex-husband's fingers stiffened on the fork. I watched the way his father looked down into his gravy. And I watched the way Amelia's eyes never left mine. She was waiting for me to flinch. I didn't. I took a sip of water, set the glass down, said nothing. But I understood something that night. Amelia didn't hate me. She hated what I represented. I had walked into a room full of carefully maintained roles: wife, sister, daughter-in-law. And I had chosen something else. Something they couldn't measure by rings or recipes or baby showers. I chose purpose. And that made me dangerous. To her, I was a threat she couldn't name. She wore perfection like perfume, promoted early to flight lead, never had a hair out of place. And yet, no matter how many hours she logged, how many passengers she charmed, she would never get the same look from the family that I got just by walking in uniform. She wanted admiration, but admiration in that house came with scars, and Amelia had none. That night, as I helped carry dishes to the sink, she followed me into the kitchen. "You know," she said casually, stacking plates, "not everyone's impressed by medals." I rinsed the gravy pan. "I'm not here to impress anyone," she smiled. "Exactly, that's why you don't." I turned off the faucet, dried my hands. She thought she was cutting deep. But all I saw was a woman drowning in comparison. The kind of person who smiles wide enough to hide how tightly they're clenching. That look, that quiet, wordless resentment. I'd seen it before, not in combat, not on the field, in base housing, in meetings. Among women who had to fight twice as hard to earn half the room's respect. And those who resented them for doing it. So when I saw Amelia again on the flight that day, clipboard in hand, that same glint in her eyes, it wasn't surprise that hit me. It was recognition. She wasn't reacting to circumstance, she was seizing control. Finally, she had a way to shrink me down without raising her voice. Without risk, without exposure. That was her version of revenge. Move me from seat 2A to 31B. Not because I didn't belong, but because, for once, she could make me feel like I didn't belong. And she did it with a smile. But here's the thing about people who work so hard to be seen. They forget that those who are already whole don't need the spotlight. We carry our light inside. And no amount of clipboard power or faux professionalism can erase what's already written in the bones. That night at Thanksgiving, I left early. Didn't say goodbye. I remember driving home in the dark, hand gripping the wheel, radio off, and I remember thinking, she's going to break something one day, maybe not me, but herself. Because that's what happens to people who always have something to prove. They chase perfection so hard, they forget how to be human. I sat in seat 1C. My back slowly began to relax into the cushioned leather. It didn't make sense. None of it did. The weight of the silver star in my pocket felt heavier now, not because I doubted what had just happened, but because I knew everyone was watching. No one said anything. The plane had gone completely still, like we were suspended in time. No rustling newspapers, no beeping call buttons, not even the usual impatient sighs of a delayed departure. Only the gentle hum of the cabin pressure. I adjusted slightly, careful with my posture. The pain that had bloomed in my lower spine during the shuffle to economy was still there, like a smoldering coal. But now it had space to cool. In front of me, the aisle stretched long and narrow, rows of faces half turned toward me, some curious, some respectful, some confused. No one made eye contact for long. I remember thinking, I've sat in a helicopter with both doors blown off. I felt the heat of an RPG flash past my face. I've strapped bleeding men to stretchers in the middle of a sandstorm. But I have never had this many people look at me at once. And still, I said nothing. Not out of modesty, out of fatigue. I wasn't tired from war. I was tired from having to prove myself to people who wouldn't care, even if they knew the truth. The general was gone now, sitting quietly back in 31B, like it was where he'd always meant to be. I didn't know why he had done it. At that moment, I had no idea he'd seen the video, no clue that he recognized my name from an old citation. To me, it had just been one man standing up when no one else would. A moment later, a flight attendant, not Amelia, a younger girl with anxious hands, came over and offered me water. I thanked her. She didn't meet my eyes, just nodded and stepped away. The cabin remained hushed. Somewhere behind me, I heard a soft click, probably another phone recording. A notification pinged on someone's tablet. A message popped up. Whatever had just happened, it was already spreading. And Amelia? She hadn't come back into first class yet. She was probably still in the galley, catching her breath, maybe trying to write up a report to save face, or maybe, for the first time, she was sitting alone with the echo of her own choices. I leaned my head back, closed my eyes for a moment. A phrase drifted through my mind, something I'd heard once, years ago, from a combat medic in Iraq. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought in silence. I understood it now. This wasn't about reclaiming a seat. It was about being seen, about the quiet dignity of not stepping on anyone, but also, finally, not letting yourself be stepped over. I opened my eyes again. The light above me was soft. The window beside me revealed a sky that had shifted, clouds parting just slightly, sunlight streaking across the tarmac. The plane still hadn't moved. We weren't just delayed, we were paused, as if the world had pressed a button and said, "Wait, watch, remember this." And though no announcement came, I felt something ripple through the air. This wasn't just a flight anymore. This had become a mirror for how we treat people when no one's keeping score, for what we do when no one's expecting us to stand up, and for who we choose to recognize, quietly but fully. General Flynn didn't stay in first class. After leading me to seat 1C and making his quiet declaration, he turned without fanfare and walked back down the aisle. His polished boots moved with practiced grace, his shoulders squared, unbothered by the glances and half-hidden phones tracking his path. No words, no victory lap. He simply returned to economy, to the very seat I had been moved to. And that, more than anything, left the cabin frozen in a hush that refused to lift. People shifted in their seats, but no one spoke. A couple near the bulkhead whispered softly. A businessman who'd been reviewing spreadsheets tucked his laptop away. Across from me, a woman holding a child just stared, eyes wide, lips parted, not in shock, but in a kind of reverent confusion. As for me, I stayed still. My back settled into the support of the seat, the ache in my spine dulling to a background hum. But there was something else pressing gently against my side. Familiar weight, familiar warmth. The box. I slipped a hand into my jacket and pulled it out slowly, resting it on my lap like it was fragile. It wasn't made of anything fancy. Just a dark, velvet-lined square, worn at the edges. Latch slightly loose. No one else noticed. I opened it. Inside was the silver star, smooth, clean, polished once and never again. Its edges gleamed faintly in the overhead light. The ribbon still carried a slight crease from when I folded it all those years ago. I hadn't shown it to anyone in a decade. Not since Germany. Not since the citation ceremony that I had requested to keep private. The photos never made it home. The medal had stayed in the box, close to me, but always out of view. Now, here it was, cradled in the center of my palms, finally breathing air again. Beside me, someone shifted. I glanced to my right. An older man, late 60s, maybe early 70s, wearing a veteran's cap and an old bomber jacket, sat with his hands folded over his stomach. His eyes dropped from the box to my face and back again. He didn't ask. He didn't stare. He just nodded. Not deep. Not theatrical. Just a subtle, weighted nod, like passing a torch without words. "Thank you," he said. His voice was gravel and time. "Thank you for what you did." I nodded back. I didn't trust my voice to hold steady. He leaned closer, not invading, just enough for me to hear. "I lost my brother in Vietnam. Got a Bronze Star for trying to drag him out. Didn't make it, but you." He gestured lightly toward the medal. "You must have made it." I swallowed hard. "I brought 2 back," I said quietly. "One of them made it through rehab. The other didn't." His mouth twitched. A faint smile, bitter and warm at once. "Then you earned that star twice." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't need filling. The kind built from shared spaces, field hospitals, transport planes, green zones, dusty roads. Across the aisle, I noticed a boy, maybe 9 or 10, peeking through the gap between the seats. He wasn't shy, just observant. His mother was asleep beside him, head tilted awkwardly. He looked at the box in my hand, then back up at me. I smiled, just a little, then closed the box gently and tucked it away again, out of sight, but never out of meaning. The hush in the cabin remained, not oppressive, but reverent. People felt something, even if they couldn't name it, even if they didn't know exactly what had changed. Something had, not just for me, for the air in that plane, for the unspoken understanding passing through passengers like wind through tall grass. I hadn't said a speech. I hadn't demanded respect. But in that moment, without a uniform, without a title, without a megaphone, I was seen. Not as a hero, not even as a veteran, just as someone who had paid for her seat. In more ways than one. I didn't look back. I had no need to. The silence behind me said enough. But even without turning around, I could feel the temperature shift, like the oxygen had thickened behind row 1. It wasn't just surprise anymore. It was embarrassment, unease, a collective pulse of what just happened beating from seat to seat. I could feel Amelia's presence behind me, not like a shadow, but like a spotlight she'd once controlled that had now spun around and blinded her instead. Then someone said it. A voice, male, older, carried from just a few rows back. "Excuse me, did you really just downgrade a Silver Star recipient to 31B? The words weren't angry, they weren't loud, but they were precise, sober, sharp as a blade drawn slow. There was a pause, and then the passenger added, "Is that standard Delta loyalty policy now?" A few heads turned. Someone in first class let out a short breath through their nose, half chuckle, half disbelief. A woman across the aisle leaned over to whisper to her husband. Even the boy who'd been watching me earlier straightened in his seat, curious. I didn't move, but I could hear Amelia's shoes click backward, one step, then another. The cabin door at the front opened. She disappeared behind it. From the corner of my eye, I saw another flight attendant shift uncomfortably. She looked down at the beverage cart like it had suddenly become fascinating. The mood had changed, not because I asked it to, not because General Flynn made a speech, but because, for the first time, everyone was doing the math, realizing something didn't sit right. Back behind the curtain, Amelia stood frozen. At least that's what the reflection in the tiny galley window suggested. Then she pulled out her phone. I imagined her fingers moving fast. Maybe she thought she could spin it, frame it as a misunderstanding. Maybe she just needed to check her schedule, pretend this wasn't unraveling. But when the screen lit up, her face dropped. And I mean dropped. She stared. Scrolled, blinked. Her posture changed, less certain, more collapsed inward. Because there it was, a video, already viral, shot by the young woman in row 6, the one who had quietly recorded the entire exchange earlier. The title, "This is what loyalty looks like now." It was already on Twitter, 50,000 views in under 10 minutes. The clip started with Amelia's voice, light, controlled, but unmistakably condescending. A soldier should be seated with their people. This is a loyalty seat. Then the camera panned slightly as I nodded, silent, and moved back down the aisle. The comments were rolling in, fast. Vet Mom 44. That woman is a Silver Star recipient and got treated like trash by a flight attendant? A Justice for Vets. Disgusting. I hope Delta has something to say. Marty Media. She didn't even fight back, just took it with dignity. That's the scariest part. The video cut to the moment General Flynn entered. The silence, the salute, his voice. We don't let heroes fly in the back. Amelia stared at it, not just at the views, but at what it meant. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This wasn't about an ex-sister-in-law ruining her moment of authority. This was public. And worse, it was viral in a way that couldn't be controlled. Her hands shook slightly as she lowered the phone. She looked up at her reflection, at the crisp uniform she'd once worn like armor. Now it felt more like a target. And for the first time, maybe ever, she realized. This wasn't about me. This was about something bigger. About the people she thought no one noticed. The quiet ones. The ones who didn't clap back. The ones who just moved to 31B and stayed silent. Until someone else stood up. Until the silence got loud. People never expect me to be the one with a medal. Maybe it's the way I wear my hair, neatly pulled back, no nonsense. Maybe it's the way I keep quiet in rooms that reward loudness. Or maybe it's because I don't look like the image they have in their heads when they hear the words Silver Star. I've never looked like a hero, not to strangers, and certainly not to my own family. I remember the day I received it. Ramstein Air Base, Germany, 5 years ago. It was a cold morning. Gray sky. The kind of wind that slices through your uniform and makes the fabric feel like ice. They held the ceremony in a hangar near the tarmac. Rows of folding chairs, a podium, a flag that didn't stop fluttering. I stood where they told me to stand, back straight, shoulders level, eyes ahead. My hands stayed at my sides, even though they wanted to shake. I had taken a round in my left shoulder, not during a firefight, but during an evac. A transport pilot was bleeding out, and I carried him out from under fire, got him into the air. I patched him with one hand, held pressure with my knee, and kept talking to him until we cleared the danger zone. He lived. The doc said it was luck, but I'd seen enough to know that sometimes luck looks a lot like preparation. When the citation was read, I didn't cry. I scanned the crowd. No one I knew, no one from back home, not even a card, not even a call. I told myself I didn't care. But when the general walked up to pin the medal on me, he hesitated. He didn't say the standard congratulations. Instead, he leaned close and said, "You don't need noise." This medal found its way to the right chest. Then he stepped back, saluted me, and walked away. That was the most human moment I'd had in weeks. Afterward, a few people clapped. A few others stayed seated. I collected my certificate, nodded to the other recipients, and stepped out into the wind again. I didn't take a photo. I didn't post anything. I folded the medal into a handkerchief, placed it in a wooden box, and carried it home. Not to show off. Not to frame. but because carrying it reminded me not of what I'd done, but of what I still had to carry. I didn't wear that medal so people would let me stand. I wore it so I'd know when it was time to stay seated. That distinction matters. The thing about recognition is, it's supposed to be a mirror, not a megaphone. And the mirror didn't always reflect what others thought it should. Sometimes I saw a tired woman. Sometimes I saw a girl who still wished her father had called her back. And sometimes I saw nothing at all. That's the version Amelia could never accept. She wanted heroes to shine, to command attention, to be unmistakably visible, like the ones in posters or parades. But the best ones I knew, they blended in. They walked past you in line at the grocery store. They held doors, sent quiet checks to wounded buddies. They never posted about it. I guess that's why the moment on the plane felt so strange. Not because I was moved up, but because people were looking and really seeing. It wasn't just that I had a medal. It was that I'd never asked for anything, not even a seat. And now, every eye on that flight watched me like I was finally visible. Like the quiet thing they'd missed suddenly had a name, and that name was dignity. Not noise, not revenge, not humiliation, just quiet dignity. Back in Ramstein, after the ceremony, I sat on the edge of my bunk. I remember looking at the box again. It was simple, wooden, with a tiny latch that always caught if you didn't lift it just right. I didn't open it, I just held it. And in that stillness, I remember thinking, maybe no one clapped because it wasn't their war to understand. Maybe it still isn't. So when I think back to that day, and the days that followed, I don't remember the stage or the general or even the base. I remember the silence, and how sometimes that silence held more weight than any applause ever could. I'd been in firefights quieter than the first 5 minutes after I sat down in 1C. The hush wasn't polite. It wasn't comfortable either. It was loaded, like the moment before a breach, when even the walls seemed to hold their breath. People didn't know what to say. Some avoided eye contact. Others stared outright. I adjusted my posture. My back still protested every movement. The seat was wider than I needed and still tighter than I liked. The kind of ironic discomfort I'd grown used to. I wasn't trying to make a point by sitting here. This seat was offered. But the air said otherwise. The air said, judgment is coming. Then came the voice. It was calm, clear. And for the first time that flight, human. A woman in 3A, mid-50s, silver gray hair, crisp blazer, soft voice, leaned out slightly and said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the way some of us overlook people like you. We don't mean to, but we do." She didn't smile. She didn't expect anything back. I nodded slowly. That was all I had the strength for. And just like that, the cabin unsealed itself. One voice opened the door, others followed. The man behind her muttered, "Damn right." The woman across the aisle blinked fast, like she didn't know what to do with her hands. Then came a different tone, from 2D, a younger man, maybe early 30s, business casual, laptop still open on the tray table. He scoffed. "I mean, no offense, but isn't this a bit much?" he said. "Giving up a seat just because someone served? My uncle was in the army. He didn't expect first class for life." I didn't turn, but the woman in 3A did. "She didn't ask for the seat," she said. "It was offered." He shrugged. "Still, kind of feels like hero worship, like we're trained to just bow, not question." That was the moment the tension tilted. Not just sympathy, not just gratitude. Now came the division. A man farther back chimed in. "She has a silver star, dude. That's not just service. That's valor." Another. "Valor doesn't mean priority boarding, does it?" Murmurs. Crosstalk. A growing hum of discomfort. The plane hadn't even taken off. I kept still. Let them speak. Let them work it out. I'd been in rooms like this before, not literally, but emotionally, where the silence broke into factions, where praise became politics, where respect turned into a debate. I wasn't surprised, because the question that always comes up after the thank yous dry up and the flags fold is this: what does a hero deserve? Do we reserve seats for them? Do we honor them in silence? Do we act like nothing happened at all? People like me live between those answers, never quite landing on one. A younger woman, college age, spoke up behind me. Her voice wavered, but her words didn't. "My brother didn't come back from his third deployment," she said. "If someone had offered him a decent seat, maybe he'd still be alive." The silence after that was sharper than the one before. No one argued, no one corrected her. Even 2D lowered his eyes. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because I wanted to block it out, but because the noise outside had matched the noise inside. And for once, they made the same sound. I didn't want special treatment. I wanted recognition without spectacle, dignity without debate. It wasn't about the seat. It wasn't about the medal. It was about not having to explain, again and again, why pain is sometimes carried in the spine and not the voice. I felt someone shift beside me. The man in 1D, an older gentleman, worn hands, maybe ex-service himself, nodded slightly. "A seat's just a seat," he said, not loudly. "But giving it up, that's something. That simple, that true." I looked around carefully this time. Some faces still carried skepticism. Others had softened. A few stayed unreadable, and I didn't blame them. But the question lingered, hung in the air like the scent of metal and dust after a long day at the range. Do heroes need priority? Or just a place where they're not questioned? Maybe that was the real heart of it. Not elevation, just space. And that's when I realized this wasn't about military service anymore. It was about the thin line between being seen and being used. I hadn't asked for the spotlight, but now that it was here, I wouldn't apologize for standing in it. Not for what I wore, not for where I sat, and definitely not for the silence I chose over shouting. I didn't know it yet, but 60 miles away, in a high-rise office above the terminal, a decision was being made that would change the course of this flight, and my life. His name was Robert Ames, Deputy Director of Air Carrier Operations, and before he sat behind 5 screens and a reinforced desk, he'd worn a different kind of uniform. Ames was Air Force, retired. He flew C-130s in his prime, saw things he never talked about, lost people he never forgot. One of those memories lived in a desert canyon outside Kandahar, where his transport was hit, grounded, and burning. His escape? A supply convoy led by a quiet logistics sergeant who rerouted everything to get them out, including herself. She never gave her name, she just got it done. He never forgot that rescue. He never found her again either, until 2 hours ago. That's when his phone buzzed with a clip sent from a junior ops manager on standby rotation. The clip wasn't long, 27 seconds, grainy and angled from a row back. It showed a flight attendant gently but firmly telling a woman in fatigues to move back to economy. Then came the voice. "Soldiers sit in the middle, loyalty gets the aisle." The woman didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She just moved. The camera panned just enough to catch the glint of something metallic in her hand. Ames paused, rewound. That box, that metal, silver star. He'd only seen one up close once, but it was burned into memory. His hands moved faster than his mind. He opened her boarding record. Zariah West, former U.S. Air Force logistics officer, retired captain. His chest tightened. West. The name clicked. Not from paperwork, from after-action reports, from the unofficial circles of men who owed their lives to people like her, people who carried crates, not rifles, but got shot at all the same. She had to be the one. And Ames, for all his rank and years behind the desk, still believed in doing something when you knew. So he did. He pulled up the secure military liaison channel, typed a short, direct message. Urgent, FYI passenger on FLR 1987, Captain Zariah West, Ret. Just went viral, recommend eyes, link attached. Then he took a risk. He copied a private address. It belonged to General Daryl Flynn. No formal chain, just one line. "You may want to be on this flight, sir." He didn't expect a reply. But 27 minutes later, Ames got a ping. "Confirmed. I'll take it from here." What he didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Flynn had just landed from Germany, hadn't even made it home. When he read that message, he didn't call a driver. He didn't clear it with protocol. He rebooked his ticket, changed terminals, and boarded FLR 1987 without fanfare. Didn't even bring his aide. He chose his old dress uniform, pressed but not flashy. To the crew, he was just a dignified senior official, flying home early. To the captain, he was a mentor. But when Flynn stepped onto that plane and saw me, row 31, seat B, quiet, alone, something passed between us without words. Recognition, respect, and maybe regret. That I'd been left in that seat long enough for it to become a statement. I found out all this later. After the plane landed. After the media storm. After the formal apologies and the suddenly curious phone calls from old colleagues. But in that moment, all I knew was this. Someone had seen. And that someone had done. That's what I carried as I sat in seat 1C, not just my own story, but the chain of unseen people who still remembered that doing the right thing wasn't about protocol. It was about timing. Flynn didn't speak for long when he gave me the seat. He didn't have to. But every second he stood in that aisle, 4-star general, back straight, eyes steady, he wasn't just honoring me. He was honoring the memory of everyone who served in silence, everyone who never went viral, everyone who sat in the back, because no one thought to look. Ames, back in his office, watched the security feed. He saw me walk forward. He saw the look on the attendant's face when I passed. And maybe, for a second, he saw that canyon in Kandahar again, where someone like me got him home. Some people assumed General Flynn gave up his seat because of rank, or out of some show of patriotism. But the truth was quieter and heavier. He didn't salute me because of the medal in my hand. He saluted me because of a promise he once made and never got to keep. It happened in the spring of 2011, over the sand-washed ridges of northeastern Afghanistan. My team had been assigned to resupply a forward operating base that hadn't received fuel or water in 4 days. There were rumors of IEDs planted on every road in and out. So we rerouted, up, not around. That meant airlift. I was one of the few logistics officers certified for sling load coordination from ground up. It wasn't glamorous work, but if done wrong, people died. The helo came in low. Wind tore the dust sideways. We got the first load hooked and cleared. The second pass went wrong. Rockets screamed out from the ridgeline. One clipped the tail rotor. The chopper bucked and listed, dropped hard. There were 6 crew aboard. 2 got out on their own. The rest didn't. I didn't hesitate. I crawled through smoke and fire foam, pulled 2 men from the wreckage, one unconscious, the other screaming in Dari, bleeding badly from the side. The last one, the pilot, was still strapped in, dazed. Half his uniform melted into the seat. I don't remember much of what I said. Just that I told him to look at me, to keep breathing, to trust me. I remember he was heavier than he looked, and that I didn't feel the burn on my shoulder until much later. When medevac arrived, I was flat on the rocks beside him, couldn't hear in one ear, shaking from the adrenaline and smoke, but he lived. He was Major Daryl Flynn back then. And 3 weeks later, I received a letter, sealed, formal, unsigned, but stamped with a command crest. It read, "Sergeant West did not wait for orders. She moved because someone's life was falling apart. I have worn stars on my collar and medals on my chest, but I have never earned what she did in those 6 minutes. She will never ask for recognition, but I owe her the honor I once reserved for myself." I kept that letter, never framed it, never showed it, because something about it made me feel seen, and at the same time, made me want to stay invisible. Recognition had always made people act strange around me, especially people like Amelia, so I buried it. Like most things, years passed. I left the service, quietly, no farewell ceremony, no retirement cake. I never saw Flynn again, until that day on the plane. When he stepped down that aisle and met my eyes, something old lit behind his. He didn't smile, didn't perform. He just said, "You shouldn't be sitting here. We don't let heroes fly in the back." Then he did something that shook me more than any explosion ever had. He brought his hand to his brow and saluted, not to remind others of my service, but to repay what he owed, to give back the moment of honor he believed I never received. When I sat down in seat 1C, the hush around me was deafening. But my thoughts weren't in that cabin. They were in that canyon, with the rotor smoke, the bleeding crewman, the melted seatbelt, and the moment I didn't wait for approval. I never told anyone who that pilot had been, even after I recognized him from the letter, because for people like me, The work had never been about acknowledgement. It was about completion. And yet, when he saluted me in front of an entire flight of strangers, he gave me something I didn't know I'd been missing. Closure. The kind you don't ask for. The kind you don't earn with time served or medals awarded. The kind that comes quietly on a Tuesday morning with a single movement of respect. By the time we landed, I'd powered off my phone. Not because I expected anything, just force of habit. Sometimes silence is kinder than curiosity. But as soon as we disembarked, a young man in uniform tapped my elbow near baggage claim. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you might want to check Twitter." I frowned. "Why?" He only smiled, nodded with respect, and walked off, duffel slung over one shoulder like memory. When I turned on my phone, it lit up like an airfield at midnight. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A few pings, then a dozen, then hundreds. Mentions, screenshots, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. The headline from a regional paper was the first thing I saw. Silver Star recipient removed from first class by family airline staff. 4-star general intervenes. Below that, a still frame from the video. Amelia pointing, me standing. The box in my lap. Flynn mid-step in the aisle, already removing his jacket. Then the second wave hit. Veterans started sharing the story. One from the 101st wrote, "If we let this slide, we say it's okay to forget our own." A Marine aviator from San Diego posted, "You don't push a silver star to the back and call it loyalty. We see you, Zariah West." They started tagging me, friends, strangers, people from my past deployments, even a few civilians whose brothers or daughters had served. Then came the hashtag. Arc West Clause. It started as a joke from a former logistics sergeant who wrote, "From now on, any airline staff pulling stunts like this needs to remember the Arc West Clause. Don't disrespect quiet heroes and expect silence." It took off. Within an hour, it trended in 5 states. By morning, it was on national news. Reporters reached out. One even called my old unit's public affairs officer asking for comment. Someone dug up a pixelated photo from the Ramstein ceremony. Others found footage from a decade-old interview I'd once done about field logistics during wartime. I barely remembered giving it. Suddenly, I was everywhere, except I wasn't. I was in a hotel room near Jacksonville, sitting on the edge of the bed, my boots still laced, watching myself unfold on a screen like I was someone else. There was a panel on one channel debating whether I'd been overpraised. One host asked, "Should we give people special treatment just for wearing a uniform?" Another veteran on the same panel shot back, "It's not about special treatment, it's about basic decency." That line echoed in my head. I hadn't wanted attention. I hadn't filmed anything. I hadn't even said a word when they moved me rows back like I didn't matter. But something about the moment, a woman standing quietly while another tried to humiliate her, had struck a nerve. This wasn't just about me. It was about the way we erase people who don't demand to be seen. That night, a retired colonel wrote a long piece on his blog. He'd never served with me, didn't know my story, but he wrote, "In every war, there are names history forgets. Zariah West was never asking to be remembered. That's exactly why we must remember her." And maybe that's when it hit me. This wasn't going away, not the videos, not the arguments, not the hashtags stitched across tweets and t-shirts. Because for once, a quiet act wasn't being drowned out by louder ones. And it made people wonder, what if we've overlooked thousands of stories like this? I wasn't there for the hearing, but I knew how it likely unfolded. A plain room, glass windows, neutral carpet and cooler air than necessary. 3 people on one side of the table, 2 managers in navy jackets, and a compliance officer with tired eyes and a ballpoint pen. Amelia sat across from them, her uniform crisp, but her shoulders weren't straight. I imagined the way they began, procedural, polite. "Ms. Westbrook, thank you for coming in voluntarily." Amelia probably nodded, lips tight. She was always good at sitting straight when someone was watching. Then the question came. "Can you explain why you reassigned a confirmed first-class passenger to seat 31B without customer request or operational necessity?" It sat in the air like a fog that didn't move. They waited. She didn't answer right away, not because she didn't have an excuse, Amelia always had a reason on file. But not that day. Because the truth wouldn't fit the form. Because the only answer she had, I didn't want her to look better than me, wasn't something you could justify on a form labeled Incident Review Policy Deviation. I imagined someone sliding a printed transcript of the cabin log across the table. Then quietly, the older woman, director of ethics, or perhaps HR, asked the next question. Did you know she was a Silver Star recipient before the reassignment? Amelia shook her head. No. And she hadn't. I believed that. She didn't know, but she didn't care to ask either. Then the man beside the director said something different. He didn't ask a question. He placed a hand on the folder and said, You didn't hate her, that's not it. A pause. You just couldn't stand being the one always standing behind her. Silence followed, long and open like a confession that didn't need words. She didn't protest. Didn't explain that I'd never rubbed my awards in her face. Didn't mention that she'd made the seating change with a few keyboard taps, thinking it would go unnoticed. She didn't say she felt small that day, or that she'd always been chasing something invisible. And in not speaking, she said all of it. I imagined someone offered her water. I imagined her nodding, eyes down. There was no raised voice, no drama, just a printed warning and the word review circled in yellow marker, and a note in her file that would never quite fade. Incident reflected possible bias and judgment lapse during operational decision-making. But I knew that wasn't what stayed with her. What stayed was the knowledge that someone had seen through her, finally, that her envy wasn't just hers anymore. It had been named. The review board dismissed her with formality. She stood, collected her binder, nodded once, and left the room with the same poise she had walking down the aisle of that plane. But this time, no one turned to look at her with pride. No one whispered about her professionalism. No one offered to walk her out. The hallway felt longer, the lights harsher, and her shadow smaller. I wasn't there, but I've stood in rooms like that, rooms where the air tells the truth louder than words. And I know what it's like to hear a silence that changes you. It was 2 days after the flight when my phone rang. No caller ID, no saved number. But I knew who it was before I even picked up. The kind of silence that follows a public collapse is never truly silent. It just waits for someone to be ready to say something human. I answered on the third ring. Zariah, came the voice, small and stripped of polish. It's me, Amelia. I didn't speak right away, just listened. She must have been standing somewhere private. Her voice didn't echo. I imagined her in a stairwell, gripping her phone like it was the only steady thing left. I should have never touched your seat. I didn't even think, I just saw your name, and something in me. She paused. Snapped, I guess. She was crying, but trying not to. I was jealous, not of the medal, not of the general, but of the way people looked at you like you mattered. Her voice cracked. I'm just a flight attendant no one remembers. You were someone before you even walked on that plane. That hit different, because I remembered being the soldier no one remembered. I remembered crawling across a burn-scarred field to patch up a comms officer no one else could reach, only to have my name left off the after-action report. Amelia, I said slowly, you're not invisible. She let out a short, broken laugh. You wouldn't say that if you heard the things people say in the crew lounge. They think I'm done. You're not, I said, but you need to make a choice. The line went quiet again. You can stay small and bitter, or you can do the job so damn well that no one ever forgets your name again. Not because you shouted, but because you showed up better. Another pause. A breath caught in her throat. I don't think I deserve that chance. No one does, I said gently. That's why it's called redemption. You earn it. She didn't respond right away, just breathing, trying to hold herself together. I could tell this call had cost her something. And in a way, it had cost me too. It's easier to stay angry, to hold the moment of humiliation like a badge. But maybe healing isn't about vindication. Maybe it's about letting someone be more than their worst moment, because we've all had those. I'm sorry, Zariah. The words finally came, clear and unguarded. I believe you, I replied. And I did. Not because I was quick to forgive, but because I knew what it meant to be seen as less than you were, until you proved otherwise. Thank you, she whispered, for not hanging up. I served with people who left no one behind. I try to do the same. The line stayed quiet for a few seconds more. Then I heard a soft click. She had hung up. Not out of dismissal, but with the kind of quiet that says, I'll try to do better, and next time, I'll let my work say it for me. I sat there with the phone still in my hand, eyes staring past the wall. It wasn't closure, not really. But it was something stronger. A bridge, not built from apology alone, but from the courage it took her to make that call. And the choice I made to answer it. It started with a memo. 2 weeks after the flight, someone forwarded it to me from an aviation newsletter I'd never heard of. Effective immediately, it read, decorated military veterans with valid citations will have their purchased class honored, regardless of loyalty status. Ground crew and in-flight staff are to be briefed under the new Passenger Rights Addendum, now formally referred to as the West Clause. I had to read it twice before it sank in. They had named it after me, not after the general, not after the incident, after the quietest person on that flight. At first, I didn't know how to feel. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't filed a complaint or given interviews. I hadn't raised my voice. But maybe that was why it mattered. By the end of that week, it wasn't just aviation blogs picking up the story. Mainstream news ran headlines like, Flight Scandal Prompts New Veteran Protections, Silver Star Sparks Policy Change, The West Clause, Dignity in the Skies. My inbox began to flood, most of it from other veterans. A retired Navy corpsman wrote, I watched the clip 10 times. I've been invisible in airports more times than I can count. You made us visible. A mother from Ohio said, my daughter's in the Marines. She saw what happened and said it made her proud to wear the uniform again. But the one that stayed with me came from a woman named Karen in Tucson. She wasn't a veteran. She wasn't related to one. She wrote, Zariah, I'm just a teacher. I've never done anything as brave as you. But after watching what happened, I realized I've been complicit in moments where I should have stood up. I won't be silent again. Thank you. That email made me cry. Not because I needed the praise, but because I suddenly understood something. Sometimes, your story isn't about you. Sometimes, it's about what it allows other people to see in themselves. The airline held a press conference a week later. I didn't go. I stayed home. But I watched the live stream from my kitchen, coffee in hand, dog at my feet. The CEO, a woman named Dana Hill, stood at the podium in a navy blue suit, looking as tired as she was determined. We live in a country where respect shouldn't require a medal, she said plainly. No one should need to show proof of sacrifice to be treated with basic decency. But if someone has made that sacrifice, we must be the first to rise, not the last. Cameras clicked. Her voice didn't waver. This is not just about veterans. This is about culture, about how we see each other. The West Clause is one small step toward remembering our shared obligation to honor dignity, whether it wears a uniform or not. I paused the screen right there, not because I needed to watch it again, but because for the first time in years, I felt something shift, not out there, but in me. A strange kind of peace. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was acknowledgement. Quiet, steady, earned. They didn't owe me anything, but someone had chosen to stand up anyway. And for someone like me, who'd spent years showing up for others in silence, that was everything. I still don't wear the Silver Star. It stays in a velvet-lined box in my top drawer, tucked beneath a neatly folded t-shirt and a photo of my old unit from Kandahar. No spotlight, no glass case, no ego. For years, I thought not wearing it made me humble, but really, I was hiding it, as if recognition was something I had to apologize for, as if surviving, just surviving, wasn't a story I was allowed to carry. Now, I leave it there because I choose to. It no longer feels like a burden. It feels like a bookmark, one I can close when the chapter ends. I teach a women's self-defense class twice a week at the local rec center. It's not fancy, just mats, mirrors, and the occasional awkward laughter when someone falls out of a stance. But it matters. I don't tell them about the military unless they ask. Most don't. They know me as Miss West, the quiet one who moves with precision and watches the exits like she was born to. Maybe that's enough. There's a teenage girl named Kyla who never looks anyone in the eye. She flinches when people raise their voices, but she never misses a class. A few weeks ago, she lingered after everyone left. She asked if I'd ever been scared in real life. I told her the truth. Yes, but I didn't let it stop me from standing where I needed to. She didn't say anything after that, but she stood taller the next class. That's why I keep teaching. Not for medals, not for recognition. For moments like that, small, silent victories that no one claps for, but you feel in your chest long after the lights go off. Every now and then, someone in town recognizes me from the video. They hesitate, wondering if they should say something. Sometimes they do. A barista once handed me my coffee and said, "Thank you for making people think twice." A teenager at the grocery store whispered, "You're the airplane lady, right? You stood your ground." They're awkward about it. Quick, polite. I always smile and nod, but what I really want to say is, it wasn't just for me, because it wasn't. It was for every woman who's ever been talked over, every veteran who's ever felt invisible, every person who's ever carried something sacred and been told it didn't matter. Standing up that day didn't change who I am. It reminded me who I've always been. I don't need to be remembered as a hero, just someone who didn't stay quiet when it counted. I once believed battles required noise, shouting, marching, headlines. But with time, I've come to realize some of the hardest battles don't raise a sound. They take place in silent spaces, between sisters, between rows of airplane seats, between the choice to speak or remain still. I wrote in my journal recently, not every war needs weapons. Some only need you to stand, without making someone else bow. That line stayed with me, not because it sounded wise, but because I lived it. Now, every Wednesday evening at the downtown community center, I show up early. I sweep the floor even though someone else already has. I check the mats, I stretch, I breathe. Then the women begin to arrive. Some are nurses, some are teachers, some are recovering from something they don't talk about. They don't come here to become warriors, they come to remember they already are. Your strength isn't in how hard you hit, I remind them. It's in how calm you stay. We go through the motions, stances, grips, breaks. But the real teaching happens between drills. A woman with 2 jobs and 3 kids tells me she stood up to her boss this week. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just stood still and said, "No." Another confesses she finally left someone who told her she was nothing. She packed a bag, held her child's hand, and walked out quietly. I don't share my full story with them, but they know enough. They've seen the clip. They've read the headlines. Some even saw the hearing where my sister stared at the floor and finally told the truth. But what matters isn't that I was the woman in 1C. What matters is that I was the woman who didn't ask for anyone to move, but accepted it with grace when someone did. That's what I want them to carry, not the viral moment, but the stillness before it. The choice not to retaliate, not to escalate, but to hold ground with dignity. The room glows with warm amber light as the sun sinks behind the brick buildings outside. Dust particles dance midair. Someone laughs, then catches herself, and everyone laughs too. I walk among them, correct a stance here, offer a hand there. No one looks like a hero in that room. Not me, not them. And that's the beauty of it. We don't need to. Because real strength doesn't ask for attention, it simply shows up and stays. If someone ever makes you feel small, don't shout. Look them in the eye, and let your silence make them remember what guilt feels like. That was the hardest lesson for me. For years, I thought power came from volume, from speeches, from medals. But now I know true power is quiet, steady, unshaken. On that flight, I didn't speak to defend myself. I didn't wave my silver star. I didn't remind anyone of what I'd done. But someone else remembered, and that made all the difference. I didn't board that plane to make a statement. I didn't fly to be remembered. I just didn't want to be forgotten. There's a difference. When the general stood for me, people thought he was honoring my rank, but he wasn't. He was honoring a moment years earlier, when I stood up for someone else, quietly, when no one else did. And so now, I'll leave you with this. If you ever see someone being pushed down, be the first one to stand. Don't wait for applause. Don't expect anyone to follow. Just stand. Because that's how things change. Not through outrage, but through example. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.